Political action committees, what are they? Why are they so important in today's American political environment? And in an era of big money donors where the political scene is so controlled by individuals and corporations with deep pockets who can seemingly make unlimited contributions to political candidates or causes of their choice, how can ordinary voters like you and I have any confidence that when we go to the polls and in only a few weeks to cast a ballot in the 2024 historic presidential election, how can we have any confidence at all that our vote is actually about on this edition of Political Update here on Atlanta News First. I'm Tim Darnell, joined by Dr. Tristan Hightower, who is an assistant professor of political science at Bryant University in Smithfield, Rhode Island. Dr. Bryant, big money, we all know that whoever has the deepest pockets seem to have an inordinate amount of influence in the political and legislative environment in the United States. Tell us exactly what a political action committee is.
Right, so Political Action Committee, or PAC, as we sometimes call it, is a separate entity from a candidate's campaign that can organize money and also donate and coordinate things with a particular candidate or political party. So these emerged in the early 1900s, essentially to help fundraise and coordinate funds. So a PAC is simply this organization that donates money and coordinates the spending of money for candidates. They're a little bit different than what we might call a super PAC. These are not legal terms, but colloquial ones. Super PACs emerged after Citizens United in 2010, really after a lower court decision in the wake of Citizens United. And as you mentioned, super PACs do allow for what we term unlimited donations, right? So people, organizations, corporations can give unlimited amounts of money into a super PAC. The difference between a super PAC and a PAC, though, is that the super PAC cannot coordinate directly with the candidate or a political party. So while you can donate an unlimited amount of money, that organization, that entity cannot be directly communicating with, coordinating a plan with a particular candidate or a particular political party, right? So they can raise the money, and what they do is then what's called an independent expenditure. They're making expenditures independent of the candidates and go and can run ads for or against a particular person and other things of that nature. One thing you touched on too, how can we feel like we're making a difference here if this is allowed, if corporations can donate unlimited amounts of money, if wealthy people can donate tons of money to these things. It's a concern, and I think people should rightly be concerned about that. But my answer would be you should still go out and vote because that's the only thing, without money that you can go do. There are some states where it may be more restrictive to get the ability to vote, or it may cost some money to obtain IDs and things like that. But corporations cannot prevent you from going to vote by and large. So it is a civic duty. It's not a zero-sum game, right? So we tend to think of if my candidate loses, there was no point in me voting. Why did I even do this? And it's easy to feel that way. But, I always think when I played basketball in high school, if you have kids who play sports, you don't tell your kid that if you know that the team they're playing is ranked 10 times higher than they are. They go out and they play because that is what they're supposed to do. That's what sportsmanlike conduct is. That's how you build character. It's how you get experience. Voting, I think, is a similar thing. You need to build the habit. You need to get used to going out and voting. And just because your candidate loses doesn't mean everything is lost, right? If you're in an election and this vote split is 51 to 49%, that says a lot, right? So you could still lose there and your preferred candidate is not going to win, but it sends a message. And then you have a chance in perhaps 2 years for a midterm or 4 years for another presidential election to rally people to your cause, to understand where the goalposts are in terms of how people are voting and where, and really set that standard.
At one point in time, years ago, there was a major push for campaign finance reform. And there were a lot of challenges to the notion of placing limits on the amount of money that an individual or a corporation could make to a candidate because the argument was it was an infringement on your First Amendment right of free speech and expression. Is there such a thing as campaign finance reform anymore?
I think there has continuously been a push for campaign finance reform. You still hear it talked about by a number of legislators who are concerned with the amount of money. Particularly, we hear the word dark money a lot, and it sounds very scary, perhaps for good reason. Dark money is often nonprofits that are set up to donate to perhaps super PACs, and nonprofits do not have to disclose donors because of their tax status. So that's where we get the term. It's very hard to trace where that money is coming from. It's dark. It's not easily seen. But I would say that the conversation around campaign finance reform has never really died, depending on which circles you're in. Um, Now, Citizens United about 15 years ago set a strong precedent when the Supreme Court makes a ruling, right? That's a very strong precedent that's set. And that ruling did essentially change what we would define as an entity or person in the world of campaign finance, and it allowed corporations the right to donate in certain ways, essentially as a First Amendment issue. Because of that, campaign finance is incredibly difficult, right? If we make this a constitutional issue, that leaps it up in importance by orders of magnitude significantly.
We're obviously in the middle of election season, and we see constant barrages of political advertisements for Donald Trump, for Kamala Harris. And we always see I imagine that there's a legal reason that we see disclaimers at the end of every commercial, or we hear, I'm Kamala Harris and I approve this message. And yet sometimes we don't hear that. Explain to us in the difference of when we're watching our local news or national news or our favorite television programs or what have you, what are the disclaimers at the end of these commercials and how are they different between paid for by a campaign or not affiliated with any campaign?
So I'll preface this by I'm not a lawyer, but one of the things that is the differentiator here most often is going to be that whether it's a super PAC or the candidates committee that's doing it themselves, right? So when you hear I'm Kamala Harris or I'm Donald Trump and I approve this message, they have taken an active role in planning that and directly coordinated that ad. That means a couple things. One, where the money comes from is designated, right? So that money can come from PACs and it can come from individual donors. So it's much more restricted when they produce those ads. It cannot be coordinated with the super PACs that have the quote unquote dark money. In terms of real world application, what does that mean? Candidates can engage in certain things politically, not just legally, but politically. They might have to be more tempered, right? They might be able to say certain things about their opponent or certain things about themselves that if you have a super PAC that they're not affiliated with officially and legally, can say something perhaps more extreme or more negative. Negative ads do not play well in favor of the person running them very often. So if Harris or Trump were to get on and start saying the nastiest things about their opponent, the American people don't like that because it's not seen as civil. However, if that information comes out from an independent super PAC, that the candidate can say, I had nothing to do with this, they're still getting that information and they might agree with it and they don't have to assign blame to their preferred candidate. So I would say from the behavioral perspective, that's a really key difference there.
So if I'm understanding correctly, your negative campaign ads where Donald Trump is a convicted felon or Kamala Harris is a liar, those are coming from super PACs. They're not coming, more often than not, they're not going to come from the candidates themselves. Am I correct?
I would say more often, it's not a hard and fast rule, but I would say more often than not, the more negative something looks, it is going to be a super PAC type ad.
So once an election season is over, political action committees and super PACs can continue still raising money. Am I correct?
Yes.
And what do they do with with those funds? Do they engage in lobbying on Capitol Hill? Do they continue trying to influence public opinion on the issues? What happens to PACs and super PACs when the election is over?
I think it's kind of an all of the above type situation. We have some PACs that spend all of the money that comes in very quickly, and they're set up for that purpose. And so by the time the election is over, there's not a whole lot there, and they do cease to exist. There are others that may shift money toward the national party that they prefer and allow that party to, do things in support of that party. They may stick around as an organization for another election cycle. They may divert funds to continue running campaign ads even after the fact to affect that public opinion. So there's a lot of things they can continue to do, and it depends on what the landscape looks like at the time, where that money is best spent, and there's often very savvy political operators behind that to make those decisions.
Do public officials themselves, like governors, congressmen, representatives, they are free to start their own political action committees on their own, are they not?
They can, I think where you spend your time is an important question. So, you look at state, local officials, all the way up to the president. One of the big revenue streams is small donors. That's what on YouTube, if you're ever on, depending where you are, you might see somebody running locally or President Harris or Vice President Harris, excuse me, or President Trump saying, please donate now. That's because people like you and me can donate money up to $3,300 an election to a candidate. So that's a big revenue stream for them. Calling out to their supporters and saying 10, 15, $20 makes a difference. It can be 40 to 50% of their campaign funds are coming from these types of people. So you can establish, PACs can be established for candidates. But I think a lot of times what we see is those candidates actually going after people, small donors themselves, and allowing the perhaps external organizers to do the PAC work.
Well, we are only a few weeks away from the tremendously important and historic 2024 presidential election between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. We're wrapping up our conversation on this edition of Political Update on Atlanta News First with Dr. Tristan Hightower. He's an associate professor of political science at Bryant University in Rhode Island. Final thoughts. What are some things that viewers and voters need to keep in mind between now and November? Early voting is going to be starting very soon. We're being already inundated with a tsunami of political advertisements. Sure, that's going to multiply tenfold over the next several weeks. Some things that we as voters need to keep in mind when we're looking at huge amounts of money being invested in the American electoral process.
So I think first and foremost, if you're being inundated like so many people with these political campaign ads, make sure you are fact checking things, not just for the person you like and the things you hear about your candidate of choice, but the other person as well, to make sure is what's being said a fully accurate picture, what you would describe as a fully accurate picture. So there's opinion to this, but what is the evidence for these claims? Make sure you're backing that up. And if it's swaying the way you're thinking, make sure you do go do your independent research, find credible sources, and do some evidence-based looking for those things. I would also say that, elections the presidency is often, and probably for good reason, it's the highest office in the country, put on, kind of the top of everybody's list. And that's not about you should get out and vote because of that, but you should also pay attention to those state and local elections as well. Your members of Congress, your representatives at that level, oftentimes those people are on the same ballots. And, you can go to your local election board and get a sample ballot to see who's running. Even as big money is being spent on the big candidates, Remember that there are smaller, quote unquote, smaller elections as well that make a big difference in your everyday life. So make sure you pay attention to who those people are, what they stand for, and
All
what they're going to
politics
do.
is local. All politics is
That
local.
is absolutely right. We love that phrase in political science.
Well, thanks to all of you for watching this edition of Political Update. Thanks to Dr. Tristan Hightower, Professor of Political Science at Bryant University in Rhode Island. Catch us every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. here on our YouTube channel and all of our streaming platforms, and listen to Political Update and all of the podcasts from Atlanta News First, wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's on Spotify, Apple, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcasting platforms. Thanks for watching.